everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on today's webinar, How to Rethink Products and Services Through Equity Design. I'm your host, Nicole Jones from TechSoup, and as we're getting settled in, let us know, where are you joining in from today? So my name's Nicole. I'm joining in from Oakland, California. Let us know in the comments and we'll get started in just a moment. Cool. Hi, Patty from Princeville, Oregon. Rachel from Oakland, California. All right, neighbor. We've got Stephanie from Vancouver, Canada. Caitlin from Virginia Beach. We have Sophie from Italy. Let's see, we got Bend, Oregon represented. Kalamazoo is in the house. Kentucky, Spokane, Eureka. Okay, I think we've got our four corners, maybe just if we get a Florida in there somewhere, represent. But I think we are well represented here today on our webinar. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, a little bit of a housekeeping. So you'll notice all lines are muted right now, but if you have questions at any point, go ahead and type them into the Q&A panel of your webinar. So it's those two little message bubbles, that's your Q&A, and that is the best place to raise your hand around questions, and we will be answering those throughout via chat and also at the very end during our Q&A portion. You can also use chat. It's kind of like the water cooler. So if you're hearing something, you want to expound on it. If you have something that's worked well for you or a really cool resource that you want to share with the rest of the community on this webinar today, the chat is a perfect place to do that. You're also going to receive an email within the next 24 to 48 hours with the recording from this webinar, in addition to the slides and any resource links that were mentioned. Again, you're going to get an email with the recording, with the slides and resource links. So anything that you might have missed, no sweat, you'll get it in your inbox within the next 2 days. Okay, with that out of the way, a little bit about TechSoup. So TechSoup is a global network bridging tech solutions and services for good. So you might know TechSoup for its software program, but we're much more than that. We also provide support, training, community, and much more to help over 1 million nonprofits in over 200 countries and territories around the world. And we absolutely love to be your resource partner. And to help make that possible are the more than 100 corporate donors and providers of software, hardware, and services who have chosen the TechSoup platform to create and grow impactful donation programs. So you can check out all of the great offerings from our partners at the Nonprofit Tech Marketplace, and you can find that at techsoup.org/get-product-donations. We'll include that link in your chat, but this is the place where you want to go to find how to get different things to work remotely with your team, right? We've got, as you can see, a variety of partners that we work with, so check it out. We also organize it by use case, by solution, so it's really easy to navigate and find the solutions that you need. And I also want to share this special resource page for nonprofits impacted by COVID-19. We recently updated it with even more resources, so do check it out. We'll include a link in the chat and in the post of that email, but it includes great things like tools to support remote work, training courses, policy resources, webinars, workshops, and much more. All right, now on to introductions. Once again, I'm Nicole Jones from TechSoup, and we're joined by Stephen Davidson from TechSoup as well, who will be assisting with our chat and just being an all-round superstar. In addition, we are joined by Anatala Gudoshi, and she is passionate about bringing innovation and digital transformation to the pressing needs of our society. At Exigy, she leads projects with the San Francisco Department of Public Health, San Francisco Digital Services, and Bloom Affordable Housing Portal, among others. Antonella has extensive experience in leading innovative, equity-focused products, as well as increasing strategic and evaluation capacities for nonprofits, international organizations, and local and federal governments in Argentina, Australia, Latin America, and the US. And it is a total delight and honor to have her here today. Antonella, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much, TechSoup, and everyone that is here with us today. So exciting to see people joining from all over US and even from some other countries in the world. So we are super excited to get this conversation starting with all of you. So why don't I go ahead and share my screen? Can everyone see my screen?
Looks great.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Okay, so what we're gonna discuss today is how we can rethink our products and services through equity design. So the goals is getting you inspired. We're gonna provide you an introduction on these concepts and frameworks. We hope to challenge your assumptions around these topics and also to provide you with new tools or different perspectives of tools that you might be familiar with already. So this is the agenda. As I mentioned, we're gonna cover some fundamentals and frameworks, then we'll have some reflection time together. We'll move to covering what are the challenges to start this work or actually to rethink or getting better at it, some drivers of success, and then some specific tools that we can think together. We also wanna tell you a little bit about our journey at XCG and then provide you with some resources and have some space for Q&A. Let me start with a disclaimer. I want to say that we are on this learning journey together. I guess some of you might be familiar. XCG is an innovation and digital studio based in San Francisco, California. Our focus of work is on social impact. We work very closely with government organizations, philanthropies, and NGOs to help them build digital solutions and actually improve their strategy and innovation capacities. We totally believe that a more inclusive innovation is possible, and we think we can do better on this line of work, and we totally believe on the power of equity design. So we are, in our team, we are experts in design, in product management, in research, and also in technology. We are not experts on equity, so I want to emphasize that disclaimer. We are drawing a lot from the great work that the organizations that you can see in the screen have been doing for decades, and then we'll share more specific resources that you can dive deeper later. But basically all the frameworks that we are bringing here to them today are actually from these organizations that are experts on the matter. Okay, so let's get started with some fundamentals and frameworks. So let's get started with design thinking. Design thinking is an iterative process to actually problem solve in a very creative way. The idea is to put the people, the beneficiaries at the center, with the intention to create better services as well as better internal processes for the team. So the core practices of design thinking are empathy, ideation, and experimentation. So instead of designing a solution for a project or a service upfront, the idea is to go and engage with the community, empathize with the community, and then find out multiple possibilities and solutions, prototype, test with different stakeholders, what can work, and then based on findings, start iterating and analyzing. So even though like some of us are designers, we also believe that anyone working with different communities, with programs, with services, has a designer in themselves. So we think that this framework is helpful, though some of you might have done it in a more traditional way of designing projects or in this iterative and more experimentation way. In terms of equity, of course, there are multiple definitions, but then the core value is that we are all equal and we all deserve same opportunities and to develop to achieve our full potential. It's a constant process of understanding and acknowledging the history and context that have created and is creating oppression, uncovering biases, and promoting healing practices. So it's also about raising the voice of traditionally excluded people. So why equity design? Because even though that these two approaches are very powerful in themselves, they also have some limitations. The design thinking process or human-centered design usually fail to address causes of inequality, and actually many times can actually reproduce inequality power relationships. And then on the equity work, sometimes there is a need to bring a greater focus on long-term systemic change, on navigating complexity, and also have more powerful tools for communities to take creative action or being able to scale a good solution or a good program into a bigger policy, for instance. So the equity community design allows to uncover the limitations of these disciplines and then build upon its strengths and find opportunities to mitigate the impact of racism and maximize impact for the community. So the ethos mantra behind it is that how might we design with the intention to eliminate oppression? So equity design is a new way of achieving equity. It actually provides us with layers of tools, activities, and checks to illuminate where there is racism and inequity. And it does that through the lens of equity. So basically it's focusing on the problems, but understanding first what are the power dynamics and the inequity problems that are embedded in that context or problem, then brainstorm transformative possibilities and prototype and test in a low cost, but inclusive and participatory way. So the idea is to test with the community and not just kind of consult them in one stage of the project. So it's both a very, very big attention on working with the community. So in this way, it allows us to create the conditions and relationships for inclusive innovation, to acknowledge the barriers, to have a meaningful engagement or a meaningful project. And then it really helps us to have deep conversations. This process, of course, can be painful because it's a process that allows us to acknowledge biases and blind spots that we need to find in different levels, in our individual level, in the institutional level of our organization, and in the structural level, like the policies in place that are affecting that problem, program, product, or service. So let's cover a little bit in more detail what are the practices of equity design. And again, as I mentioned before, we are building on the work that the Stanford Design School have done with the National Equity Project. They have created this framework of liberatory design that basically combines the design thinking process that I was mentioning before with two strong practices, I would say frameworks of noticing and reflecting. So let's cover in more detail what those means. So in terms of noticing, the idea is to understand before entering any context or starting a new project or service is like, what are our own identities, values, emotions, biases that might actually affect the way we engage with that community and with that project. So it's to develop self-awareness, is to uncover and accept all the things that we might not know or that we might give for granted, because if we might, like for instance, if you work in one space for long, maybe you already assume that you know a lot of things, and there is a time for you to actually double check what are other things that you might be missing, or what are other ways to rethink the powers dynamics in that project or in that community, or even checking because the context changed. So it's important to have these checkpoints. And this framework of self-awareness allow us to emphasize with humility, curiosity, and courage. So in terms of practices, it's important to check these four, I would say, dimensions. One is the identity and power, what we were discussing before. Isn't it? Who am I? Like, how are we situated in relation to power? It's very important, like, we are complex human beings, we are intersectional, so we have a lot of identities and values in place. So it is really important, and that's something also that evolves. So that's why it's important to treat this as a continuous process and not something that, okay, I'll do it once a year, that might be enough for a good check-in. Then the context is really, really important. Like, what's the situation and equity and oppression in that challenge or in that problem. In terms of the partnerships, it's based on, of course, on our identities, the power dynamics, the context. How can we create a liberating process for that community? How can we ensure that we're not gonna re-traumatize them or like recreate some of the problems that we have uncovered? And then our intention, like, how are we gonna measure if we are on track in terms of increasing equity? So the other layer that I mentioned of this framework is reflecting. Reflecting, so after we do the engagement, or why we are in one engagement with a community, in one project, is like checking constantly how can we do better. So it's reflecting on our actions, our insights, and then what we have learned with the users and with that context. And then how we can challenge power, either in that engagement or like for a next phase of that project or on another situation. So basically, here are these kind of four important practices within reflecting. The first one is about challenge commons focus on urgency. As we all know, there is a big focus on productivity, and then that can affect a lot the process of uncovering power dynamics and to really seeing things from a different perspective. On the other hand, because of that sense of urgency that we are usually, and productivity that we are kind of in organizations usually constantly feeling that pressure, we tend to jump too fast into conclusions. And of course that doesn't allow to, to uncover or to change the status quo. So it's important to double check how are we doing on progress, what evidence do we have that we are becoming more self-aware and actually that we are correcting ourselves. And then it's not just checking with ourselves and our teams, it's also about checking with our communities, with critical stakeholders for us. And then it's about sharing. So it's creating stories, creating truths and learnings, and then sharing that, yes, with the community itself, with other stakeholders. And it's important to co-create those stories and see if like what we see as the truth is also the way the community sees as the truth, and the learnings are things that are common learnings. Okay, sorry, I'm checking on time. One thing I want to also emphasize is that there are different approaches or different ways of looking at equity design. One is the ones that we just described, the liberatory design that let the voices of the community lead. And then there is this approach called scaling down, which actually believes in all the values and practices that I mentioned before, but place a greater emphasis on the role of the designers as critical facilitators of the process. So as experts that can unify languages to create understanding and productive conversations across stakeholders that usually don't tend to communicate with each other, because sometimes for communities it's hard to reach out to some stakeholders or to establish meaningful partnerships with them. So this approach emphasizes the great opportunity that designers can have in terms of navigating complexity and helping in that direction. At the same time, it emphasized the importance of bringing designers to scope the right opportunities to scale, because usually what this approach is saying is that communities are really good at understanding their context, but at the same time, they tend to struggle to see the systemic processes that are in place or variables that are in place, and also to scale that. Even think about feasibility, desirability, viability. So that's kind of a spot where the designers can really help. And then also focusing on the problem and not on the symptoms. That sometimes that's something that communities tend to struggle because of the difficulties of seeing the big picture, the systemic view of a problem. And then for all of us that comes from a design background, this is kind of Donald Norman is the father of design, and he's the one also promoting this scaling down approach. But basically what he's saying is that experts provide the tools for analyzing and for better understanding. That tend to be more from the top-down approach, but then the people and the communities are the ones that own the culture and the understanding of the environment, and they are the ones best positioned to apply the knowledge of these experts. So basically it's bottom up data-driven approach that really necessitate from each other. So the top down and the bottom up approach are both needed. That's kind of another perspective that we wanted to share with you. Okay, so now the idea is to start exercising this framework together right now. So we're gonna have some reflection time and what is called by experts in the field, for instance, by the Equity for Design framework, as an equity pause, to actually do what we mentioned before, noticing and reflecting about inequity, power dynamics in the projects, products, or services we might be working on. So the idea is to approach these questions more with your professional hat, but we know that we need to bring the whole person, so also feel free to reply in an more like in an individual way. So let's get personal, and I will pass now the floor to Nicole.
Great. Okay, so we're going to launch this two-part poll. And you should see it coming across your screen now. So the first question is, when was the last time you felt powerless? You have three options: last week, last quarter, and last year. The second question is, when was the last time you felt powerful? And same options for the first question. We'll just take a few moments as those results start to come in. All right, I see more people voting, so we'll just keep it open for a little while longer. Once we get to 75%. Great. Okay, so let's see what people said. So it looks like 72% for the first question, when was the last time you felt powerless? 72% said last week, followed by last quarter, 20%, and 8% of you said last year. And for the second question, when was the last time you felt powerful? 68% of you said last week, followed by 15% of you who said last quarter, and the rest last year. What do we think of those results, Antonella?
Thank you. I think also it will make more sense now that when we move on to the next question. Oh, sorry. Yeah. We would love to hear from you, like in what situations you do not trust yourself with too much power. It'd be great to listen to some of your responses in the chat, but yes, take a few minutes to reply, because definitely is a thought-provoking question that require us to reflect.
Yeah, so we'll wait for some of those responses, and as they come in, I'll read them out. In the meantime, a comment from Jessabelle saying, the fight for equity is a roller coaster. Okay, so we've got some responses coming in to the question, in what situations do you not trust yourself with too much power? We have Stephanie saying hiring decisions. Ingrid says, making financial decisions on behalf of the organization. Paul said, when I'm feeling ungrounded. Os said, when I do not have enough input from others, I prefer to have collective thinking. I'll just read a couple more here. Diane saying budgeting decisions. Rochelle saying security, privacy, design decisions, and digital products that have a login component. Katie said designing or working alone, which is a reality for many of us these days. Laura saying making organizational decisions by myself. And we'll do this last comment from Ingrid, when I'm the white person making decisions that impact people of color. Great, there's a lot of great responses here. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that's very helpful to hear. And it's also, I mean, it resonates a lot with the journey of XCG now as we are reviewing our practices on how we can be more intentional in building anti-racist products and services. So we'll definitely have been discussing all of the challenges that you have mentioned. So it's at least good to hear that we are in, confirm that we are in this journey together. Okay, let's move on. And before moving on, I totally recommend George I. I took these inspirational questions from his work, and he has a series of like checklists to actually reflect on power dynamics when we work with communities, and they are really powerful to engage in a deep conversation with yourself and then with your practice and with your teams. So now let's move on and review what are common challenges that teams and organizations usually face when trying to do more of this work. Usually it's making it a priority, either to get started or to get better at it, to scale whatever might be in place. So some challenges are changing mindsets and the culture because it's critical to engage in deep and hard conversations. And then if the right culture is not in place, that's very hard to do for people to show up vulnerable, to be open to acknowledges some of their blind spots or biases, and then to work as a team together to support each other with those. Um, and in general, of course, having the right culture is critical to sustain any change that your team might be wanted to start. Also, there is usually a lot of fears around experimentation and uncertain outcomes or like reputational outcomes. Even for organizations that are more used to experimentation, sometimes what tends to happen is that we can be good at experimenting with some projects, but then experimenting in the equity field seems more, more uncomfortable or risky. Then convening and engaging the community, especially if you haven't worked with that community before, or if for any reasons the experiences were not positive in the past. So the challenges there can range from recruiting the right community, understanding, okay, what are all the stakeholders that we should convene and talk with to actually build a position of legitimacy to work with them, to actually be truly intentional, because some people on the team, or because of funding constraints, you might be able to do some consultations with the community, but more from like a perspective of, okay, this is one moment in the project, and then not even going back to the community. So it's not really working with them, it's more consulting with them. And then what I just mentioned, moving from one moment in the project to a consistent, sustainable strategy and a new way of working. So let's move on to drivers of success. So it is really important to demonstrate the business value of all this work and all these initiatives that we might be proposing or that we might want to do in a better way, and actually track metrics of success, being able to demonstrate progress. So first, it's really important to allocate the time to also set up the right kind of brainstorming rules and to create a safe space where people actually dare to have deep conversations, and then to use those spaces to go into the next step of defining a common equity design agenda, either for your team first and then for the organization, and then a clear roadmap on how to track progress. Because this is kind of we need to create a virtuous cycle where we define a direction and then we start tracking progress, and by tracking progress we can show the value and then get more support to sustain those efforts. Another important factor is starting small, and then especially for the organizations that or teams that are just starting with this type of work. And I mentioned defining metrics, but also criteria for prioritization upfront. So then when the moment of making decisions about one approach or what to test, what to experiment with, or maybe even decisions around the community engagement, the participatory process, then there are clear clear inputs on how to make those decisions. Otherwise, decisions can be delayed in critical moments of the project, and we don't want to do that. We want to define impact upfront, but of course being open to iterate on that based on new evidence or new inputs that we might be receiving from the community. And then usually one challenge or one excuse that many teams face is like not having data. It's like, yeah, we don't collect that data, or like we don't have any system in place to understand what is happening in that domain. And it's important to understand that that shouldn't be an excuse for long. Like, it might happen that we don't have data for some things that we want to measure, but then we need to create either the monitoring system in place or the data tools to be able to collect that. And it's also very important to use a diverse set of metrics, not only quantitative metrics, but also qualitative stories. And then seek as many ways as possible to know our users or the beneficiaries of our programs. It's important to understand the different layers in the communities. Even a community that might seem homogeneous, actually, when you get to know the people, then you realize that there are a lot of layers that we need to uncover there. On the other hand, it's important not to be opportunistic with our engagements. And sometimes, again, that's something that may happen not with the intention to be like that, but then for financial constraints. So it's important when we plan this work to understand, okay, what are the constraints that we might face throughout the project, and then try to address it in a meaningful way. And also, it's important to be patient to build the right relationships, because that will be the only way that the community will trust us. And then being flexible, because as we get to know a new community, there are a lot of things that we will be learning or uncovering. So it's important not to go with a very flexible roadmap of what should happen, even though we might have defined one, but being open to new learnings and actually truly learning and doing the partnership with the communities. And then ideally building long-term partnerships. And last, in terms of the important drivers of success, is building a practice of experimentation and moving quickly. And then we can use different artifacts to do so, but it's important to reward the fact that we will be considering multiple ideas, and also ideas especially out of the box. And this is particularly important when you have been working on one field for a very long time, when your organization has a long expertise in one area. Trying to use different artifacts to challenge assumptions is very important. And then not sticking to only one approach, but on the other, like considering different ideas and being open to test different approaches. Okay, so moving to getting started, we want to share with you a little bit of our journey here, what XCG have done so far. Again, we want to do way much more than this. We are currently defining our equity roadmap. So this is just the beginning for us. First, we have done a lot of donations from the Black Lives Matter movements and organizations. We have also put together some public statements, because for us it's really, really important to commit to our communities. We have started a lot of equity pauses that they have taken very different shapes. From talking very openly with the leadership and all the team members about our personal and institutional journey, you know, bringing vulnerability when we have experience oppression, when we have exercise, actually powerful dynamics that we should have, I mean, things that we should have done different. So I think that open up, we are trying to bring this culture of like embracing the whole person and people showing and having these hard conversations. And also we started doing some social justice happy hours. So that's what I was trying to say in terms of like, they take different forms. And sometimes what we discuss is a movie or resources, whatever what we are doing in our personal journeys to also continue learning more and more about this field and not only with the projects. So basically it's creating that space, that safe space to have those conversations. We are also with the product team reflecting on the need to change and augment our product metrics. So basically, of course, going beyond analytics and analyzing what are the things we can start measuring or that we need to create data points to start collecting relevant data about these equity problems. Also, as an organization, we are training ourselves with equity experts, and they will also help us to refine our equity roadmap as an organization. We are also planning to put together a steering committee of diverse CBOs that can allow us to engage with them throughout the course of the projects and not as some moments in the project. So to have a more active and engagement with communities. And then defining learning goals for each project to feel more comfortable about trying new approaches or taking risks. As I was mentioning, in the team, we have a lot of designers. So for us, jumping into experimentation is something that we really enjoy, but then the equity field is something that we need to get better at. And then, so by defining these learning goals that can be more internal goals for the team, that can create a lot of kind of comfort for the team to be able to navigate those learnings. Okay, so now to wrap up, we have just 3 more slides. And then our proposal here is to basically do the same of what we started doing, which is audit your products, programs, or services to uncover where do you have blind spots that might be preventing you from being truly anti-racist. And then how can you basically take action in a different way? So first is starting by auditing your processes. It can be your design process or your process in general, thinking about how are you engaging the communities, how diverse is the community you are engaging with, how actively you're looking to the people that you might be excluding, and then how do you weigh their inputs? Then auditing your metrics, like what metrics you are collecting, what metrics you think you should start collecting. Are you tracking in any way unintended consequences of your products or services? And then it's really important to audit your team dynamics. Some of you mentioned in the chat the hiring practices. So how diverse is your team? Is there diversity across the organization in all levels? I mean, also, if you have a diverse team, can minorities, people of color thrive and feel that their inputs are equally heard? Do they take yeah, do they take place in or are part of the decision-making process and dynamics? That's another side, which basically it doesn't finish with hiring. It's creating the welcome environment for them to feel fully integrated into the teams. And then audit your data. Where is your data coming from? So are you questioning whether you might have some biases? And then if you do, or if you find out, do you have any workflows in place or measures in place to be able to address those biases? That is also critical. And then we're gonna emphasize experimentation because operation thrives on risk-averse spaces. And then experimentation and iteration is critical to hack it. So going back again to the liberatory design mindsets and activities, they have a lot of ideas and work they have put together around what teams and individuals can do. They emphasize, of course, that this is a never-ending process that creates a lot of discomfort, that as a team we need to be able and to actually navigate that process, and then that it involves a lot of ongoing healing from the effects of oppression. It's not just one thing that we do and then that will heal. So I'm just gonna pass a little bit quickly here because for the sake of time, we wanna leave a space for questions, but it's about what we mentioned before, practicing self-awareness, seek for meaningful and really truly collaborations that actually free the community and don't reproduce these practices of oppression, and then attends to healing and shifts in power. And last, we want to invite you to iterate and experiment in the way you approach equity and equity design. So while you define your holistic equity approach, start experimenting. So basically, don't wait until you have an equity roadmap. It's just start trying it now. And then if you start with the equity poses, you will be able to uncover blocks that might be blocking your creativity, and then that might be actually affecting the way your team is thinking about equity and inclusion. So that's very important. And then test with a diverse set of users. Don't focus only on the people that you feel comfortable with, or that you're already familiar with, and you know how they will respond, or that they will be responding to you on a timely manner. Expect to be wrong, embrace that, try different approaches. This is, of course, a sensitive space, but then if you approach it with the right intentions, there is basically nothing wrong of like trying your best and then keep improving along the way. And yeah, use experimentation. I mean, some of you that are from the design communities know that there are a lot of ways to test approaches that doesn't require big investments. For instance, you can create for a new communicational campaign, you can create paper prototypes, or even if it's a new digital campaign, digital prototypes without building the whole new campaign or the new communication strategy. Same with the, if you're thinking your project is about technology or building a bot, you can do that first in, for instance, with your team responding manually, and then checking if that might be something that you want to scale or you may not want to scale. Sorry, I went a bit fast, but we kind of ran out of time. So Nicole, why don't we jump into questions?
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Antonella. I know there's so much to cover here. And once again, we will be sharing the slides and the recording of this webinar within the next day or two. So you'll get to go back and check out anything that you might have missed or spend a little bit more time on a particular piece of content. And so it's time for questions. We already have some questions coming in, so please head on over to your Q&A tab of your Zoom webinar panel. It's the two little message bubbles, so it's Q&A underneath, and that is where you can send us your questions. So let's start off. Well, we've got a couple questions from attendees about the equity roadmap. They'd love to learn more about it and wondering if you can share an example of it.
Perfect. Yes, I think for the equity roadmap, what is important is to define, I will say, one for your team that you can start soon, and then one for the organization. That will be ideal, because if you want to start like very big, that might be overwhelming, and you might need to create a lot of like processes in terms of convincing stakeholders. So I would say start small, of course, first with your own journey, but then with the journey on the team. And then I put the example, like I am in the product team, and one thing we started doing is redefining our metrics, like how are we measuring success? And now putting that lens of like, it's not enough, for instance, we build digital solutions, but it's not enough, how many clicks do we get? Because are those clicks meaningful? In volume, they might be meaningful, but then if we are not getting to the right community that we really want to get, what's the point? For instance, XCG is building a platform for affordable housing. So for us, tracking some sort of demographics is critical, because the affordable housing space, we want to focus on communities really affected by affordable housing, and by just tracking clicks, we won't be able to do so. So it's really important to rethink our metrics there.
That's a great example. Thanks for sharing that. Let's move to this question from Ingrid. Ingrid asks, how do you distinguish between moving quickly as a driver of success versus the focus on urgency as a challenge or reflection?
I hope I'm getting the question correctly, because I don't see too much the difference or between the two, but I will say it would be better actually to always prioritize first and then move quickly, because we also want to make sure that we are focusing on the right problem. Otherwise, we're going to lose a lot of time, and that can be a frustrating process. And also we might lose our battle, or like if we are starting from scratch and we are trying to sell a new approach, of course, it won't be a good way to start, but then finding the right opportunity and spending time is important, but I wouldn't spend all the time, because then we will lose momentum and interest. So I guess it's a hard balance of focusing on the right spot, but then building momentum and then bringing stakeholders on board.
Got it. Thank you for that. Let's take this question here. In the time of COVID, where there is so much uncertainty, how do you recommend balancing the need to stay afloat, which sometimes can require quick turnaround, and the need to leave space to ensure equity design? Great question.
It's a great question, definitely. Especially I'm thinking for some organizations where they had to rethink all their practices to be able to respond under COVID. We are actually, XCG is working also on that work stream. So we know for some organizations, COVID has been super disruptive, but I guess the idea is to little by little start seeing this equity design, not as another project, but a layer with all what we do. So how might we move to have equity design as a way of doing business that doesn't require us all that effort that that can feel overwhelming when we just get started with it. And that's why I will say in that case again, try to prioritize a few things to start small. And sometimes prioritizing, it can be prioritizing in a strategic way where, hey, why don't we pick this area where we might not get too much attention, but we will feel comfortable experimenting. Sometimes prioritizing doesn't mean to focus on the most impactful area that we can we can grab, because that can have a lot of risk, or it might require a lot of efforts across teams that we might not be able to put in place now. So I think I want to challenge our ideas of priorities and impact, and it's actually sometimes just getting started.
Great. Thanks for that answer. And I'm going to conflate a couple questions here around, other than investing time, how do you recommend building capacity and a business case for equity design in the organization?
Mm.
Mostly around like building capacity. Like how would one start getting buy-in to build capacity for equity design in their organization?
Great. I guess if we are talking about buy-in from the leadership, they would like to see either a strong use case, or like that you have a plan, isn't it? It's not just, I wouldn't try to encourage leaders just with ideas. I will try to show more like an end-to-end on how that might look like. So maybe bringing examples of other organizations that are similar to yours and that have done something successful. So where you can show the trade-offs and the risks, but how you might mitigate them. So you really make kind of the case for starting with that. And then I guess like the whole mantra about it is that we truly is about believing and convincing stakeholders that if we are promoting equity, our embracing equity, our programs, products, and services will be more impactful. So that should be kind of the umbrella where we bring all the stakeholders. So then it's easier to sell different interventions on different ways of doing things, because we all believe that by being equitable, we are creating and being more impactful in our work.
Yeah, that makes sense as a common denominator when sharing these new types of ideas and business cases. So thank you for that. And here's a question from Rochelle. In terms of connecting with communities, do you have advice or resources that we could check out to learn more about how to do that in a thoughtful, non-tokenistic way?
Yes, definitely. We have some slides around resources that we will share with everyone. We have resources from more like the design side of things, design organizations, and then we also have recommendations and resources from more like equity organizations. But basically, picking the right artifacts to engage the community, it's critical. Sometimes it's starting with maybe observations. Sometimes it's about doing immersion, where you go with the community to build first your understanding. Sometimes it's about doing participatory workshops and doing a lot of like kind of frequent ones until you are able to gain your role in the community. Sometimes it's understanding that they might not be able to actually engage, or they might not want to engage that deep. So it's really understanding the way to engage with them. But definitely, yeah, we can follow up on that and send not only resources, but the resources that clearly explain, okay, how you will run an ideation workshop with your community.
Great. And let's just take this one last question. I know we're just about out of time. This question is, how does this holistic equity approach differ from the traditional human-centered design thinking process? It seems very similar.
Oh, okay. Thanks for your observation and calling that out. I think that the main differences are related to the part where I talk about the limitations. That sometimes what tends to happen is that design thinking by itself, or human-centered design, doesn't challenge the powers dynamics. It's like, even we as designers in our education, we don't have formal education around oppression and around like what are the dynamics that we bring as designers. There is a power dynamic there. So I think we can definitely in human-centered design do better in terms of reflecting and noticing oppression and inequality, and basically understanding the context that is affecting the reality that we are trying to operate. And then on the equity side of things, I guess what I also mentioned before is that sometimes they struggle to be more creative, and if there is a good way of doing something, how you can scale that. I guess also the resources we will share can help that the person to go and dive deeper into this, because it's a fascinating topic and for a long discussion, for sure.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Thanks for hanging out for another minute or two as we wrap, and to everyone for your really engaged questions. Appreciate you being part of this conversation, and to Antonella and the team at Exigy for sharing these resources with us. And we will be sure to include them in the follow-up email. So stay tuned for that. And we'll just transition out here with some news around other upcoming TechSoup virtual events. So we have next Wednesday on our Facebook page, TechSoup Facebook page, we'll do a preview about our Organizing Online virtual event series. And you can find out more about these 3 sessions coming up, designed for nonprofits and sharing some tools and tactics around how to best organize your community online. You can find that at TechSoup.org/community-events. We'll include that in the email as well. And then, of course, the entire event series will be happening on the 27th. So definitely stay tuned to learn more about that. We'll be sharing that information with you shortly. And last but not least, we've got our post-webinar survey. We're going to include that in the chat. You'll also be redirected to the survey after you X out of Zoom. So please just take a few moments. That really helps us in planning for future content. So just want to make sure I include that real quick before we part ways, and it's there, and you'll also see it in your browser window. With that, Antonella, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Nicole, TechSoup, and everyone for staying with us, and your questions really help us to go deeper in our journey. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks again to the Exigy team, and to everyone. Stay safe, be well, and we'll see you on another TechSoup event. Bye, everyone.